and welcome to another episode of The Word for Kids. I'm Jaymie, and I'm guiding you through the book of Genesis in a series of 20 episodes. We've been talking about Jacob and Esau, who were Isaac and Rebekah's sons. We've heard the stories about Jacob getting Esau's birthright in exchange for some soup, and later Jacob also tricking his father into giving him Esau's blessing. At the end of the last episode, we talked about the grudge Esau then held against his brother, which grew into a desire to kill his own brother. Let's find out what happened next. Are you ready for today's adventure? Let's go! As we said, Esau was so angry that his brother had taken so much from him that he plotted to kill Jacob. Rebekah heard about this and sent Jacob away to find a wife and to protect him from his brother. So Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. Along the way, he stopped at a certain place for the night and laid down to sleep. While he was sleeping, he dreamt of a stairway resting on the earth. This stairway reached all the way to heaven. Angels of God were ascending and descending the stairway. This just means they were going up and down the steps. The Lord stood above the stairway. He said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac." Here God made it very clear to Jacob who was talking to him. The same God who promised Abraham children even though he was an old man. The same God who provided a wife and twins for his father Isaac. God told Jacob he would give him and his descendants the land on which he was lying. Jacob's descendants would be like the dust of the earth. Does this sound familiar? If so, it's because you've heard it before. God told Abraham, Jacob's grandfather, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. The dust of the earth is just another way of saying the same thing. There would be a lot of descendants, and they would spread out in every direction, to the north, south, east, and west. All people on earth would be blessed through him and his offspring. The Lord told Jacob, "I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised." Jacob woke up from his dream and thought, "This is the house of God, the gate of heaven." He took the stone and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on it. At that time, stones were used as a way to mark special places and events so people would remember them. The oil represented the sacredness of the conversation God had with Jacob in that place. Jacob called this place Bethel, which means house of God. Jacob prayed and asked God to give him food and clothes. He wanted to return safely to his father's house. He made a vow to God. This means he promised God that he would give him 1/10 of all God gave him. This is something we still do today called tithing. Oh, that sound means it's time for the word of the day.
Tithe. Giving back to God the first 10% of what he gives you. Tithe.
Tithing is a way to show gratitude or thankfulness to God for his blessings, and to put our trust in him to meet our needs. When we tithe, we commit to giving God the first 10th of the money we make. Back to the story. When Jacob arrived in Haran, he stayed with Rebekah's brother Laban. He began to work for Laban, and after a month of work, Laban asked Jacob what his wages should be. Now, Laban had 2 daughters, Leah and Rachel. Leah was the older sister and Rachel the younger. Jacob fell in love with Rachel and wanted her as his wife, so he agreed to work for 7 years for Laban in exchange for his daughter Rachel's hand in marriage. This may seem crazy to us today, and really it is. Unfortunately, at that time in history, a man's daughters were like property to be sold. So rather than paying Jacob for his work with money or goods, Laban agreed to give him his daughter Rachel after 7 years of hard work. Well, 7 years came and went. Jacob worked all that time for Laban. It was time for the wedding. A big feast was laid out before the wedding. Wedding feasts lasted a week in those days, and the whole community was there to celebrate. But when it was time for the wedding, Laban brought his daughter Leah instead of his daughter Rachel. And because she had a veil over her face and Jacob could not see her, he married her instead. When he realized it was Leah, he was devastated and asked Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Why have you deceived me? I worked for Rachel and you gave me Leah." Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. In exchange for another 7 years of labor, you can have Rachel as well." Jacob had to work 7 more years, so that means he worked 14 years in all to have Rachel. Jacob had greater love for Rachel than for Leah. As Jacob had deceived his father and stolen his brother's blessing, so had Laban deceived him. And yes, the story does tell us that Jacob had 2 wives then, both Leah and Rachel. As we've said before, things were very different in those days. Men wanted to have as many children as possible to increase their number of descendants and to fill the earth. Remember, the 10 Commandments had not even been given yet. Of course, this was well before Jesus and his disciples gave us the ultimate set of instructions about how to live a holy life that honors God, which we find in the New Testament. So while the idea of giving a daughter away in exchange for work and having more than one wife is absurd to us today, this is just what people did in those days. Okay, now it's time for the verse to remember. This week's verse is Genesis 26:24b. I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. One more time. I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Genesis 26:24b. God spoke these words to Jacob, but he says them to us too. He is with us. We don't have to be afraid when we have the God of Abraham on our side. That's all we have for this episode. I can't wait to see you again next time for another episode of The Word for Kids.